Peace, peace, peace. Glad to have you back for another episode of The Valley of Dry Bones, where we wake the dead even if they don't want it. You know what I'm saying? We can't leave them dead. We need these soldiers with us, man. We can't leave them dead. You know what I'm saying? So, let's get into this, right? This one is Waking the Dead. Spiritual warfare is mental warfare, right? The French and the birth of the Satanic system. Lucifer, the light bearer, right? Okay, so let's get into this, right? In order to understand, this system of religion, of any religion, to be honest, and how it spreads, you would have to understand occultisms and followings, because all religions start off as, small occults. You know what I'm saying? Any religion is in the science of spreading it through the community is what we will be addressing. Not necessarily on this one right here. We would just be showing how this new system was born out. So when you hear like the Antichrist and all of that, you got to understand that if you're waiting for something now that already took place, you know what I'm saying? Basically around the time of its setup, like its inception, it also had elements that was going against it. You know what I'm saying? So those elements that remained in the background are basically, brought to light. So these are one of the elements that I'm going to show you here, right? And so you can find, we talk about Lucifer and Satan as being this light bearer education, right? So as I told you, God is an element of three things: G, O, and D, right? G is the art, which we will be covering from this point on, is basically this art, right? Which is Gumar, which is, the prostitute, right? And that's when we can understand, the Masonic symbol, because here goes, the vagina. All right, so with this system, right? So then we have the O, Oz. Oz is, like the king, the one who comes along and sets these parameters that's been installed, you know what I'm saying, through this period of time. Right. So, because it's like a train of thought, and then you have somebody who brings it to fruition, like we showed with, Julius Caesar and all of that. And what's my man named Sargon, from the god, and then, Julius Caesar to Jesus Christ, and then let's say Queen Elizabeth for, the Satanic system, right? That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to put it down, because after we get into, how the deal came across between, the Scottish and the Yorks, you know what I'm saying? On how they came to this conclusion. But on this, we're dealing with the D, the bar, the philosophy, the science, right? The universities, right? So this is how the universities, the higher educations, play a role in moving and shifting society, because these are the three elements that I'm talking about that move, society in a certain way. So we're going to see how the universities play a major role in this system, but how one system was able to infiltrate. So we'll be talking about like basically the birth of this satanic system through, the Christian system, right? And so, history of European universities, seed of the satanic system, right? European universities date back to the founding of the University of Bologna in 1088, or the University of Paris, which we will, as you see, I highlighted even more, which we will be dealing with, that started in 1150 through 1170. The original medieval universities arose from the Roman Catholic Church schools. Their purpose included training professionals, scientific investigation, improving society, teaching critical thinking, and research, right? External influence such as the Renaissance, humanism of the 14th century, the discovery of the New World in 1492, the Protestant Reform, which you can see I highlighted, the Age of Enlightenment, the light bearer, which you see up there in the 18th century, the reoccurrence of political revolution, which is, the chicanery, right? Enhance the improvement of human rights and international laws in the university curricula. All right, so again, I point out, the vaginas, because this is what the symbol is. So it's really the prostitute, right? How, we covered that. And I'll put a link up here so you can have a full understanding of the G.O.D. if what I'm saying right now doesn't resonate with you. All right. So, the University of Paris, known methodologically as the Sorbonne, was the leading university in Paris, France, from 1150 to 1970, except for 1793 to 1806 during the French Revolution. Right? Emerging around 1150 as a corporation associated with the Cathedral School of Paris, it was considered the second oldest university in Europe. Officially chartered in 1200 by King Philip II of France, very important, and recognized in 1215 by Pope Innocent III. It was nicknamed after the Theological College of Sorbonne, founded by Robert de Sorbonne and chartered by King Louis IX around 1257, right? Highly reputed internationally for its academic performance and the humanities ever since the Middle Ages, particularly in theology and philosophy, because philosophy gives birth to theology. The way you view God and the world around you is born out of philosophy. So that's why you would have to study, to understand how the world that you live in today, you would have to understand the history of Western philosophy. So I would tell a person, start off with Socrates, where you would learn via Plato. So studying Plato, you would understand Socrates, right? And from that, you would have a great understanding of, the foundation of the train of thought, the way you view the world. From that, it was constructed for you. You know what I'm saying? So it introduced academic standards and traditions that have endured and spread, such as doctoral degrees in student nations. Noted popes, royalty, scientists, and intellectuals were educated at the University of Paris. In 1793, during the French Revolution, the university was closed, and by And by item 27 of the Revolution Convention, the college endowments and buildings were sold off. A new University of France replaced it in 1806. And four independent faculties, the faculties of humanities, the faculties of law, later including economics, the faculties of science, the faculties of medicine, and the faculties of theology, right, which closed in 1885. So the God department, the studying of this God thing closed in 1885. And that's going to play a major part. And you'll be able to look at France, and we'll be taking a lot of this information, and we'll be placing it side by side as when we see the Masonic system emerge, and we'll be placing certain information alongside that information, right? All right. So in 1970, after the civil unrest of May 1968, the university was divided into 13 autonomous universities, right? History. Origins. In 1150, the future University of Paris was a student-teacher corporation operating as an annex of the Cathedral School of Paris. The earliest historical reference to it is found in Matthew Paris' reference to the studies of its own teachers, the Abbot St. Albans, and his acceptance into the fellowship of the elected masters, right? Pay attention to that. If these Freemasonic terms, that should resonate well in your ear, right? There is there in about 1170, and it is known that Loreto de Conte de Signe, whatever, you know what I'm saying? The future Pope Innocent III completed his studies there in 1182 at the age of 21. Right? The corporation was formally recognized as the Universitas in edict by King Philip Auguste in 1200. In it, among other accommodations granted to future students, he allowed the corporation to operate under elastical laws, which would be governed by the elders of the Notre Dame Cathedral School, and assured all those completing courses there that they would be granted a diploma. Right? The university had four faculties: art, very important, medicine, law, and theology, right? The faculty of arts was the lowest in rank, but also the largest, as students had to graduate there in order to be admitted to one of the higher faculties, right? And so, we also say, remember, the G is an art form, right? So we can see, right, you have more people getting a set of information that is spread out through the community, and as you go up, certain information becomes limited, right, based on your studies. Right? Students were divided into four nations according to tongues and regional origins: France, Normandy, Picardy, and England. The last came to be known as the Alemanni German nation, and that's going to play a major part in understanding, Hitler and the Third Reich and these type of things, right? So when you hear these things and you don't understand what they are referring to, when you do history, you will understand it will come, to fruition. And we'll be touching on that, right? So recruitment to each nation was wider than the names might imply. The English-German nations included students from Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. The faculties in the nation system of the University of Paris, along with the University of Bologna, became the models of the later medieval universities. Under the governance of the church, students wore robes and shaved the tops of their heads in tonsure, to signify they were under the protection of the church. Students followed the rules and laws of the church and were not subject to the king's laws or courts. This presented problems in the city of Paris as students ran wild and its officials had to appeal to the church courts for justice. Students were often very young, entering the school at age 13 and 14 years of age and staying for 6 to 12 years, right? And so we know, as we read books like, The Master's Carpet, and how, and when you understand Plato and all of that, you will understand the structure of, the youth, like how you give certain information to the youth because of the way a mind is structured, right? And so you are allowed to put certain things in there, and these would be the results. So we would see how these this unrest and this system within France will play a major part in how it has always been a major issue within the French system, right? So 12th century, right? Origination, right? 3 schools were especially famous in Paris: the Plantain or the Palace School, the School of Notre Dame, and that of Sainte Genevieve Abbey. The decline of royalty brought about the decline of the first. The other 2 were ancient but did not have as much visibility in the early centuries. The glory of the Plantain School doubtlessly eclipsed theirs until it completely gave way to them. Now, if you understand these 2 systems, now they just told you, the first one pertained to royalty and if you understand the system of the royal system of France, you see how it was basically abolished, and they started this system where kings and all of that were basically removed. So we could look at these universities, right, and we can see this the way how it melts within the community, and this education spreads out, and you get a new philosophy within it, right? So humanistic instructions comprise grammar, rhetoric, dialect, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, right? Trivium and Gorviums, right? To the higher instructions belong dogmatic and moral theology. Those sources were the scripture and the practitioners' fathers. It was completed by the study of canon law, right? So we will be, addressing now when we look at rhetoric and dialect and music. These are actually arts, right? And these would be the arts that we will be covering in the G, right? This is the art right here, right? And we'll be I'll give you a little insight in them, right? The School of St. Victor's arose to rival the Notre Dame and St. Geneva. It was founded by William of Compiègne, whatever, when he withdrew to the Abbey of St. Victor. All right, so let's look at rhetoric. Is an art of persuasion. It is one of the three ancient arts of discourse, trivium along with grammar and logical dialect. As the academics disciplines within the humanities, rhetoric aims to study the techniques that speakers and writers use to inform, persuade, and motivate their audience, right? Rhetoric also provides heuristics for understanding, discovering and developing arguments for practical situations. Aristotle, which was a student of Plato, defined rhetoric as the faculties of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. And since mastery of the art was necessary for victory in case of law, the passage of proposals in the assembly, or for fame as a speaker in civic ceremonies. He called it a combination of the science of logic and the ethical branch of politics. Right, so it's a science, and we covered a lot of that before. Aristotle also identified three persuasive audience appeals: logos, pathos, and ethos, the five canons of rhetoric, or phases of developing a persuasive speech, where first confined in classical Rome: invention, argument, style, memory, and delivery. From the ancient Greeks to the late 19th century, rhetoric played a central role in Western education in training orators, lawyers, counselors, historians, statesmen, and poets. Right? So we see the impact and how this was able, how this system, because you're being educated in it, right? So while you're being educated, your educator is giving you set instructions and trains of thought. And so these things are spread out through a community, right? In these different forms, orators, lawyers, historians, statesmen and poets. So you put all of these people together, and as they put out this rhetoric, it spreads to the people, right? Dialect, also known as the dialectical method, refers originally to dialogue between people holding different points of views about a subject but wish to arrive at a truth through reasoned argument. Dialect resembles debate, but the concept excludes subjective elements such as emotional appeal and rhetoric. It has its origins in ancient philosophy, right? And continue to be developed in the Middle Ages. In the modern period, right, Hegelianisms refigured dialect to no longer refer to a literal dialogue. Instead, the term takes on the specialized meaning of development by way of overcoming internal contradictions. Dialect materialism, a theory advanced by who? Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. These are homeboys, but if you could see the communist movement, right, you would understand what their promotion is. And if you don't like communism, you better pay attention, right, because that's the system that's being built around you, right, when you're dealing with Freemasonry. So these people are working and putting out a communist system right in front of the people. So when they tell you that America was sold, and it's not what you think it is, it's an actual fact. The people have been tricked into this system, right? And so it'll look appealing because you're following those who had already sold themselves to this system, right? And all they need to do is make it look appealing for you, You know what I'm saying? The legacy of Heligans and Marxism dialects has been criticized by philosophers such as Karl Popper and Mario Bunge, who considered it unscientific. Right now, if we know, we can look into I did shows about hypnotism and mesmerism and how they'll, explain how one, mesmerism is not, scientific. So we'll see how these paths line up with each other. Because remember, it did tell you, this university played a major part within the Age of Enlightenment. So when we talk about hypnotism and mesmerism, that's where we would find ourselves at in the Age of Enlightenment, right? And that's why we can say terms like woke and conscience, because you are aware of this system, being worked, right? So dialect implies development, a development process, and so does not naturally fit within classical logic, right? Nevertheless, some 20th century logicians have attempted to formalize it, as we can see with mesmerism, right? Logos, lit, a word, discourse, or reason, is a term used in Western philosophy, psychology, and rhetoric, as well as religion. Notably, Christianity among its canonizations is that of a rational form of discourse that relies on inductive and deductive reasoning. Aristotle, again, first systemized the usage of the word, making it one of the three principles of rhetoric alongside ethos and pathos. This original use identifies the word closely to the structure and content of language or text. Both Plato and Aristotle use the term logos along with rhema to refer to sentence and proposition. Right? So again, we got Plato and Aristotle. So this is why, we would have to understand the world that you're in. You got to go back to these people. You have to study its origin, right? To understand Western philosophy, and philosophy, like I said, is how you think. So the way the way you view things, right, is when you read these people, you can see how the train of thought was structured, right? So you got pathos, appeals to the emotions and ideals of the audience and elicits feelings that already reside in them. Pathos is the term most often used in rhetoric, in which it is considered one of the three modes of persuasion, along with ethos and logos, as well as the literature, film, and other narrative arts. Ethos is a Greek word meaning character that is used to describe the guiding beliefs or ideals that characterize a community, nation, and or ideology, and the balance between caution and passion. The Greeks also use this word to refer to the power of music to influence emotion, behavior, and even morals, right? So when you hear older people and they be like, oh, that's the devil's music, right? As you're young, like I said, because we can see how, they said about the teenagers, 12, 14 years old. So they'll take that information and not really understand, right? But you can see how it has, affected the people as you look through communities. You can see how the music has played a major part. So this is where, they say, like, turn off the radio, stop listening to this type of stuff, because if you were to take all of the top songs that is out at one moment and you just read their lyrics and, all by themselves together, you can start to see the promotions that is given, to the people, and as long, how people say they're not really listening to the words, they just love the beat and all of that. So they're not really understanding what they're taking in, right? Or they might assume that it's just an individual thing without knowing that it's a universal thing. That's why, when you go to the clubs and the promotion of what's being said, especially Friday, Saturday, you're getting large masses of people to engage in this at one time. So you can mass feed, a generation within hours. You know what I'm saying? You can bombard them with everything you want them to perceive within those hours that they're taking those doses, right? Coming into the club from this time to this time. And then, during the course of their regular day, listening to this stuff, they're being bombarded with this information, right? So early Greek stories of Orpheus exhibits this idea in a complete and compelling way. The words used in rhetoric is closely based on the Greek's terminology used by Aristotle and his concept of the three artistic proofs of the modes of persuasion, along with pathos and logos, right? It gives credit to the speaker, or the speaker is taking credit, right? So with this, we can understand again, this chicanery, right? What is chicanery? The use of trickery to achieve political, financial, or legal purpose. An underhanded person who schemes corruption and political chicanery behind closed doors. Trickery, deception, deceit. French, right? Origin, French. French and English, chicane. What? 16th century, from French chicanery or chicanery to quabble, right? So the art is to cause confusion, right? And you can hear it within the music. You can hear what they promote, right? When you take the top artists and listen to their wording of things and how you are supposed to perceive the world around you, right? That's where this quabbling or this chicanery is allowed, to fester. The plan of students expanded of the School of Paris, right, as it did elsewhere. A Babylonian component of canon laws called the deductive. I'm not going to get that right. I'm not going to get it right, so don't even bother me, right? Brought about a division in the theology department. So what? There was a split where? In theology department, right? Heretical disciplines of the church had not been separated from so-called theology. They were studied together under the same professor. But this vast collection of necessitated a special course, which was undertaken first at Bologna, where Roman law was taught. In France, first Orleans, and then Paris erected chairs of canon law. Right, so you first learning that system, and then you're coming over, and they was, basically indoctrinating you into a new system within that system. Right, professors were required to have measurable knowledge and be appointed by the university. Applicants had to be asserted by examination. If successful, the examiner, who was the head of the school and known as the these are words I'm not going to get, the chancellor appointed an individual to teach. This was called the license of faculty to teach, or faculty to teach. The license had to be granted freely. No one could teach without it. On the other hand, the examiner could not refuse to award it when the applicant deserved it. But how would we know, right? How would we know if they was actually following that point out and they wasn't being biased? Who knows, right? The number of students in the school of the capital grew constantly, so the lodgings were insufficient. French students, including princes of blood, sons of the nobility, and ranking gentry, the courses of Paris were considered so necessary as a completion of studies that many foreigners flocked to them. Pope Castine II, Adrian V, and Innocence III studied at Paris, and Alexander III sent his nephew there. So you can see, the impact that this, of France had, right? The chronicles of the time called Paris the city of letters par excellence, placing it above Athens and Alexander, Rome, and other cities. At that time, there flourished at Paris philosophy in all branches of learning, and there the 7 arts were studied and held in such esteem that they were never seen in Athens, Egypt, Rome, or elsewhere in the world. Now that might be a reach. We don't know, we do know how, Alexandria, in their libraries, we know about, the Greeks and the Athens. So we don't know, this is somebody later on who wasn't there in those periods of time and making this, this claim, right? Les granted de Philip Auguste. Poets extolled the university of their verses, comparing it to all that was great, noblest, and most valuable in the world. Now remember, this is rhetoric. You know what I'm saying? Remember, we said the poets and all of them was using this as a persuasion, right? So we know, we could hear, this promotion being formulated, basically. So here it is. They telling you about rhetoric. If you understand what rhetoric, you can see it happen in real time, right? Okay, to allow poor students to study, the first college de Duxiot was founded by a knight returning from Jerusalem called Josie of London for 18 scholars who received lodging and 12 pences or denarii a month. Right, so they basically paid you, if you earned your way through it, they basically gave you lodging and some money in your pocket, right? As the university developed, it became more institutionalized. First, the professors formed an association, and according to Matthews Paris, John Selly, 21st abbot of St. Albans, England, had admitted as a member of the teaching corps of Paris after he had followed the course, right? The masters as well as the students were divided according to national origin. Alban wrote that Henry II, King of England, and his difficulties with St. Thomas of Canterbury wanted to submit his course to a tribunal composed of professors of Paris chosen from various provinces, right? History, Major Henry II to the end of 1169. This was likely the start of the division according to nations, such as which was later to play an important part in the university, right? Celestine III ruled that both professor and students had the privilege of being subject only to the ecclesiastical courts and not the civil courts, right? So this allowed them, basically to run amok. And with this, we will see why. It was like basically set up like that for a reason. Right, so now we're entering the 13th and 14th century, expansion. Right? In 1200, King Philip II issued a diploma for the security of the scholars at Paris, which affirmed that students were subject only to ecclesiastical jurisdiction. This provost and other authors were forbidden to arrest a student for any offense unless to transfer him to ecclesiastical authority. The king's officers could not intervene with any member unless having a mandate from the ecclesiastical authority. His actions followed a violent incident between students and officers outside a city wall at a pub. Right? So as we can see with this, right, they were basically immune to the system. They had a certain dress code and look that allowed them to run amok while they did what they did. And these were youth. These are from 14, 12 all the way up to 26 years old, right? And they were running amok within, the Paris streets, right? In 1215, the apostolic legates Robert de Courcon, right, issued new rules governing who could become a professor. To teach the arts, the candidate had to be at least 21, to have studied these arts at least 6 years, and to take an engagement as professor for at least 2 years. For a chair of theology, the candidate had to be 30 years of age with 8 years of theology studies, of which the last 3 years were devoted to special courses of literature and preparation for the mastership. These studies had to be made on a local school under the direction of a master. In Paris, one was regarded as a scholar only by studies with particular masters. Lastly, purity of morals was as important as reading. The license was granted according to customs, gratuities without oath or conditions, right? Masters and students were permitted to unite, even by oath, in defense of their rights when they could not otherwise obtain justice in serious matters, right? So, to get your education, you shouldn't have, to make such things as oaths or conditions with a person, like you got to carry it out like this. You wasn't allowed to do that. But the student and the master were able to unite and form these things on certain topics, and that's how you was able to shift and move the people. No mention is made either way or medicine, right? No mention is made either of law or of medicine, probably because these sciences were less prominent, right? In 1229, a denial of justice by the queen led to suspension of the courses. The Pope intervened with the bull that began with lavish praise of the university. Paris, said Gregory IX, mother of the sciences, mother, keep that word in mind, mother, right, of the sciences, is another Carthaginian city of letters, right? He commissioned that Bishop of Le Mans and Senilus in the Aki, these are all French words of, right, to negotiate with the French courts for the restoration of the university. But by the end of 1230, they had accomplished nothing. Gregory the Ninth then addressed the bull in 1231 to the masters and scholars of Paris. Not only did he settle the dispute, he empowered the university to frame statutes concerning the discipline of the schools and methods of instructions, the defense of these, the customs of the professors, and the obfuscate of masters and students, expanding upon Robert de Courcian's statutes. Most importantly, the Pope granted the university the right to suspend its courses if justice were denied until it should receive full satisfaction. So you couldn't go in there and mess with their teachings, but if you wasn't going to allow them to do their thing, they just suspended, and then all of those people that was going there is going, to have a fit because you're getting in the way of, them basically being able to graduate. Right? The Pope authorized Pierre Le Mangru to collect a moderate fee for the conferring of a license of professor. Also, for the first time, the scholars had to pay tuition for their education, 2 source weekly, to be disposed in the common fund. All right. So we're going to look at the 4 nations here real quick. We got the English nations in the back, later named, the German nations. Remember, these nations are split, right? So we got the Norman nation, right? And then we got, the Picard nation, which, basically went under France, right? French nations, all Romance-speaking parts of Europe, except those including the Norman and Picard nations, right? So they basically was doing their own thing. English nations renamed German nation after the 100-Year War, and the British Isles and Germanic speaking parts of the continental Europe, except those including within the Picard nation. The Slavic-speaking parts of Europe, the majority of students within that nation came from Germany and Scotland. Very important, because you hear about Scottish rights and those type of things, which will be coming up again later, right? And when it was renamed German nation, it was also sometimes called NATO Germania et Scotium, nation of the Germans and Scots, right? Faculties of laws of Paris. To classify professors' knowledge, the School of Paris gradually divided into faculties. Professors of the same science were brought into close contact until the community of rights and interests cemented the union and made them distinct groups. The Faculty of Medicine seemed to have been the last to form, but the 4 faculties were already formally established by 1254 when the university described in a letter theology, jurisprudence, medicine, and rational, natural, and moral philosophy, right? Think about that. Theology, jurisprudence, medicine, and rational, national, and moral philosophy, right? The master of theology often set the example for the other faculties, right? They were the first to adopt the official seal. What part? Masters of theology. So those, the gods, in the field of God, where your morals and all of that was easily, set up. And from that, the morals of that could use the rhetoric to get the others on board on this, right? The faculties of theology, canon law, and medicine were called superior faculties. The title of dean, as designated the head of the faculty, came into use by 1268, and the faculty of law and medicine by 1296. In the faculty of theology, it seems that at first the deans were the oldest masters. The faculties of art continued to have four precursors, precursors, right, of the four nations, and the head was a rector, the rector, right? And as the faculties became more fully organized, the division into four nations partly disappeared for theology, law, and medicine, though it continued in the arts, right? So, you know, the way the promotion stay separated. Each nation kept their own promotion while having like a group, meaning, you know, like the religious part, they would all come under the same thing, but the way they promoted it within their nations through the arts is how things basically differed, right? To continue through the arts. Eventually, the superior faculties, including doctors, leaving the bachelors to the faculties of arts. This period, therefore, the universities had two principal degrees, the baccalaureate and the doctorate. So basically the bachelor's degree and the doctorates, right? So we go to the colleges, right? The scattered conditions of the School of Paris often made lodging difficult. Some students rented rooms from townspeople who often exacted high rates while the students demanded lower. The tension between the scholars and citizens would have developed into a sort of civil war. Pay attention. If Robert de Conquin had not found the remedy of taxation, it was upheld in the bull of Gregory IX of 1231, but with an important modification. Its exercises were to be shared with the citizens. The aim was to offer the students a shelter where they would fear neither annoyance from the owners nor the dangers of the world. Thus were founded the Colleague of Assembly, meaning not centered of instructions, but simply student boarding house. Each had a special goal being established for students at the same nationality or same science. Often masters lived in each college and oversaw its activities. Thus, the University of Paris assumed its basic form. It was composed of 7 groups, the 4 nations or the faculties of arts, and the 3 superior faculties of theology, law, and medicine. Men who had studied at Paris became an increasingly present in the high ranks of church hierarchy. Eventually, students at the University of Paris saw it as a right that they would be eligible to benefices. Church officials such as St. Louis and Clement IV lavish praised the university, right? German college, right? This is going to be a bunch of stuff that I right, is mentioned in the early 1345. The Scots College, right, was founded in 1325. The Lombard College was founded in 1330, right, was, according to tradition, founded in the 13th century to facilitate a merging in the Eastern and Western churches. This was later recognized as the French institution, was founded by the Archbishop of Rouen in the 4th century, and when it attracted reform from within the Roman Catholic Church, such as, and those who subsequently became Protestants, and the Protestants, I would say, would be the first establishment, against the Catholic Church, while, still saying it was practicing the same thing. So when we see Freemasonry, the first system I would say that was established would be, the Protestant system, right? 1309, the seed of Satanism. From 1309 to 1377, the Italian capital took an unprecedented break as the residence of papacy, which relocated to the French city of Avignon. Let's go over here real quick to my other article, right? Avignon papacy. The Avignon papacy was a period from 1309 to 1356, during which 7 successive popes residing in Avignon at the time within the kingdom of Arles, part of the Holy Roman Empire, now part of France, rather than in Rome. The situation arose from a conflict between the papacy and the French crown, culminating the death of Pope Boniface VIII after his arrest and maltreatment of Philip IV of France, following the subsequent death of Pope Benedict IX. Here's what happened. Philip forced a deadlock conclave to elect the French Clement V as Pope in 1305. Clement refused to move to Rome, and in 1309 he moved his courts to the papal enclave of Avignon, where it remained for the next 67 years. So they was able, to get everything, like the chicanery. They caused the conflict where the popes were basically nervous to live in the Vatican. So they basically forced them to up and move into France. And this is where they, for this 67 years, they was able to master and study it and set up their system. You know what I'm saying? This absence from Rome is sometimes referred to as the Babylonian captivity of the papacy, right? So they're letting you know what I'm saying, that Babylon, this system of confusion, right, was used and able to take the papacy into their own hands, right? The total of 7 reigns of Avignon, all French, and all under the influence of the French crown, right? So a total of 7 popes reigned in Avignon, all French, right? And all under the influence of the French crown, right? In 1373, Gregory the 11th abandoned Avignon and moved his courts to Rome, arriving in January 1377. After Gregory's death in 1378, deterring relations between the successor Urban VI and a faction of the cardinals gave rise to the Western Schism. Right, the schism, is a conflict, right? So this schism within the church, came about. This started a second line of Avignon popes, subsequently regarded as illegitimate, right? The last Avignon anti-pope, So we understand, so when you're looking for the Antichrist and all of this, we already had this anti-pope and this system that was set up, right? In this. So we already had these anti-popes. So their system, was being set up until they came across their, God, should we say, of confusion, right? And so we'll be looking into the age of enlightenment to understand, what is connected with this anti-pope system, right? Lost of his support, right? Benedict lost most of his support in 1398, including that of France. After 5 years besieged by the French, he fled to Pergamon, right, in 1403. The schism ended in 1417 at the Council of Constance, right? And that council was able to basically discredit both sides, just so they can reunite the system, right? The Western Schism, also known as the Papal Schism, the Great Octorial Schism, or the Schism of 1378, was a split between the Catholic Church, lasting from 1378 to 1417, in which bishops residing in Rome and Avignon both claimed to be the true pope and were joined by a third line of Pessian Clements in 1413. The schism was driven by personalities and political allegiance, with the Avignon papacy being closely associated with who? The French monarch. Right? So we see the Prussians, these would be what we say like the right, the Germans. No. They would be, because you got the Normans, you got the Prussians. They was like their own thing, right? And they basically was able to clear the air, right? The papacy had resided in Avignon since 1309, but Pope Gregory the 11th returned, to Rome in 1377. The Catholic Church split in 1378 after Gregory the Ninth's death and Urban's the sixth election. A group of French cardinals declared his election invalid and elected Clement the seventh as pope. After several attempts to reconciliation, the Council of Pistoia 1409 declared that both rivals were illegitimate and elected a third purported pope. The schism was finally resolved when the Pistian Clements anti-pope John 23rd called the Council of Constance in 1414 through 1418. The council arraigned in renunciation of both Roman Pope Gregory the 12th and Pistian anti-pope John 23rd. The Avignon anti-pope Benedict the Eighth was excommunicated, while Pope Martin was elected and reigned from Rome. Right, so you see how these systems were set up. Dudes was like, "Hey, man, if they could do that over there, we could do this." And they was basically setting up their own system, right? So then we go right here. And after some time referred to as the Great Schism, although this term is usually used for the East-West Schism of 1054 between the churches remaining in communion with the Rome and the Eastern Catholic Orthodox churches, right? We're going to go right here. The two Avion-based anti-popes were Clement the Seventh, this is at 1378 to 1394. Benedict the Eighth, 1394 to 1423, expelled from Avion in 1403. Benedict was succeeded by three anti-popes who had little or no public following and were not residents of Avion, right? And this was Clement the Eighth, 1423 to 1429, recognized in the crown of Avion, abdicated. Benedict the 14th, right? And Benedict the 5th, 14th, it says, there's two 14ths. I guess it's two of them. And this is from 13, questionable. Anyway, the period from 1378 to 1417, when there were rival claimants into the title of Pope, as it referred to as the Western Schism, or the Great Controversy of the Anti-Popes. By some Catholic scholars, and the Second Great Schism by many scholars, the Protestant historians, parties within the Catholic Church were divided in their allegiance among the various claimants and the office of Pope. Avion, and a small enclave in the east, right, remained part of the papal state until 1791, when under pressure from French revolutionaries, they were absorbed by a short-lived revolutionary Kingdom of France, 1791 to 92, which in turn was abolished in favor of the French First Republic the following year. Right? The late papacy and the papacy of the late Middle Ages played a major temporal role in addition to its spiritual role. The conflict between the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire was fundamentally a dispute over which of them was the leader of the Christendom and secular matters. In the early 14th century, the papacy was well part the prime of the secular rule. Its importance had peaked in, the 12th and 13th century. The successes of the early Crusades added greatly to the prestige of the popes as secular leaders of Christendom, with monarchs like those in England, France, and even the Holy Roman Empire merely acting as marshals for the popes and leading their armies. One exception was Frederick, II, Holy Roman Empire, who was twice excommunicated by the popes during a crusade. Frederick II ignored this and was moderately successful in the Holy Land, right? King Philip II, the Fourth of France, wanted to use the finances of the church to pay for his war with the English. Pope Boniface VIII protested, leading to the feud. This is where the whole thing was, right? The state of affairs accumulated in the unbridled declaration of papal supremacy. In November 1302, in the papacy bull, Pope Boniface VIII decreed that it is necessary to salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. This was directed primarily to King Philip IV of France, who responded by saying, "Your vulnerable conceitedness may know that we are nobody's vessel in temporal matters." right? So we can see the French, basically saying, listen, man, we not playing that. You're not using us for this. We not even in that system, right? In 1303 AD, Pope Boniface VIII followed up with the bull that would excommunicate the King of France and put an interdict over all France. Before this was finalized, Italian allies of the King of France broke into the papal residence and beat Pope Boniface VIII. He died shortly thereafter. Right? So you understand, right, how, remember, first the king already told him, listen, man, we ain't even playing that. We not even under that. You're vulnerable, conceitedness may know that we are nobody's vessel in this temporal matters, right? So he already declared what he was about, and before it was finalized, Italian allies of the King of France broke into the papal residence and beat Pope Boniface. He died shortly after. Nicholas Bacchiani was elected as his successor and took the name Pope Benedict the 11th. He absolved King Philip VIII and his subjects of their actions against Pope Boniface. So you see, look, once he got in, he looked out and said, listen, man, that ain't a crime no more. Y'all good. Though the culprits who assaulted Boniface was excommunicated in order to appear before the pontiff tribunal. Right? Benedict the ninth died within 8 months of being elected to the papacy. After 11 months, Bertrand de Got, a Frenchman and a personal friend of King Philip's, right, the fourth, was elected as Pope and took the name Pope Clement the Fifth. So we can say, okay, between Pope Benedict, right, the 11th, or Pope Clement, whatever one you are comfortable with saying would be the foundation of this new, anti system. So, when they were saying like an antichrist would be born after this time period, because in philosophy is based on years, like 300 years, 600 years, you know what I'm saying? So from that time, so we can calculate from this date, right? This is the 1300s. So either between the 1300s or the 1900s is when they was predicting this Antichrist to be born. So just so you have an understanding of that, meaning that the system was set up, the philosophy is there. Now someone who embraces the philosophy was supposed to come about within that time frame, right? So that's how you could have like, King James, and stuff like that, Queen Elizabeth. We'll be getting into, how that system is set up, or what it is, right? Beginning with Clement V, elected in 1305, all popes during the Albion papacy were French, right? However, this makes French influence seem greater than it was. Southern France, right, at the time had a culture quite independent of northern France, where most of the adversaries of the King of France were based. The Kingdom of Oz was not yet part of France at the time. Formerly part of the Roman Empire, the literature produced by the Troubadours and the Languedocians, a unique and strongly distinct form from the royal circles in the north. Even in terms of religion, the South produced its own variety of Christianity, Catholicism, which was ultimately declared heretical, right? The movement was fueled in no small part by the strong sense of independence in the South, even though the region had been severely weakened during the Albigensian Crusades, 100 years before. By the time the Avion prophecy, the power of the French kings in the region was uncontested, although still not legally binding. A strong impact was made by the move of the Roman Curia from Rome to Poitiers in France in 1305, and then to Avignon in 1309. Following the impasse during the previous conclave, and to escape from the infighting of the powerful Roman families that had produced earlier popes, such as the colonial and official families. The Catholic Church looked for a safer place to and founded in Avignon, which was surrounded by the lands of the Papal Fifi content, whatever, some French stuff. Formerly, it was part of Arles, but in reality, it was under the influence of the French king, right? So let's look at that one more time. It says, the strong impact was made by the move of the Roman from Rome to, right, whatever it is, in France in 1305, and then Avignon in 1309. What? Following an impasse during a previous conclave and to escape from the infighting of the powerful Roman families that had produced early popes such as the Colonia and Orsani families, the Catholic Church looked for a safer place and founded in Avignon, which was surrounded by the lands of the Papal Fief, Catian, whatever. Formerly, it was a part of Arles, but in reality, it was under the influence of the French king. So this was a tactical move. If you play chess, you're supposed to use your pieces to force somebody into a position that you want them in, like you're trapping them off, right? Okay. So during this time in Avignon, right, the papacy adopted many features of the royal court. The lifestyle of its cardinals was more reminiscent of princesses than clerics. More and more French cardinals, often relatives of the ruling pope, took their position, and the proximity of French troops was a constant reminder of where secular power laid, with the memory of Pope benefits still fresh. Right? But he was letting you know what I'm saying? So we covered, this system, this anti-pope system, right? We see how it was able to be set up in France, and how the French had an X amount of time of controlling this, and in controlling this, being able to set up their own system. They already had this like anti-popes and all of this stuff already. So, right, let's go back over here. Right, and so that's 1309, where the seed of Satanism, was set up through the anti-pope, right? In the 15th century, right, this person's name, a cardinal and apostolic legate reformed the university, correcting this perceived abuse and introduced various modifications. This reform was less to innovation than to recall the observance of the old rules. It was the reform of 1600 undertaken the royal government with regard to 3 higher faculties. Nonetheless, as to the faculty, nonetheless, and as to the faculties of arts, the reform of 1600 introduced the study of Greek. Right now, the study of Greek is very important. Again, like I tell you, because if you want to understand, how you got here, you would have to study them and understand how this train of thought that you would be having to combat, right? You would have to set up a train of thought to combat the old system, right? French poets and orators, right, introduced studies of Greek, of French poets and orators, and additional classical figures like Hesiod, Plato, right? These are the people I'm not even going to get into. I can't pronounce their names like that. The prohibition from teaching civil law was never well observed in Paris, but in 1679, Louis the 15th officially authorized the teaching of civil law and the faculty of descripture. Right, the faculty of law hence replaced the faculty of descripture. The college, meantime, had multiplied. Those in Cardinal Lamon and Nervier were founded in the 14th century, and the 100-Year War was fatal to these establishments, but the university set about a remedy and injury, right? But the university set about remedy and injury. Besides its teachings, the University of Paris played an important part in several disputes in the church during the Great Schism. See how this university was right there for that. And the Council of Dealing with Heresy and Divisions in the state during national crisis under the denomination of England, and played a role in the trial of Joan of Arc. Proud of its rights and privileges, the University of Paris fought energetically to maintain them. Hence the long struggle against the mendiction order on academics as well as on religious grounds. Hence all sorts of conflicts against the Jesuits, who claimed by word and action to share in its teachings. It made extensive use of its rights to decide administratively according to occasion and necessity. In some instances, it openly endorsed the censors of the faculties of theology and pronounced condemnation of its own name, and in the case of flagellants, right? When they sit around and beat themselves in the name of God, right? So let's understand that again, right? That also a shorter conflict against the Jesuits, who claimed, right, the word and actions shared in its teachings, right, and made extensive use in the rights to decide administratively according to occasions and necessity, right? But in some instances, it openly endorsed the censorship of the faculties of theology. It was trying to block that system, right? It was trying to, do away with the God system, basically open atheism, and pronounce condemnation of its own name in the case of flagellants, right? Flagellants, right? What is the atheism rate in France, right? A poll by the research firm French Institute of Public Opinion, IFOP, conducted August 24th through 25th, found that 51% of residents said they do not believe in God, and 49% said they do. This is the effects of Freemasonry. This is what is atheism rate in France, right? The countries with the most people reporting no belief in any sort of spirit, God, or higher power are first, France, 40%, Czech Republic, 37%, Sweden, 34%, Netherlands, 30%, Estrignani, I don't know where the fuck that's at, 29%, Germany, 27%, Belgium, 27%, and Slovenia, 26%. This again is the work of Freemasonry, and I will be proving this to you, right? The abolishing by the French Revolution, right? Ancient universities disappeared with the ancient regime and in the French Revolution. On the 15th September 1793, petitions by the Department of Paris and several departmental groups and the National Convention decided that independently of the primary school, there should be established in the Republic 3 progressive degrees of instructions. The first of the 3 of the knowledge indispensable to artisans and workmen of all kinds. The second, for further knowledge necessary to those intending to embrace the other professions of society. And the third, for those branches of instructions in the study of which is not within the reach of all men, right? And so we see these 3 degrees and how one is like an open door to the people, because those will be able to spread it to everybody, then, which is basically the common man. Then you have a smaller branch, right, that works, and then you have an even smaller group that basically sends down the information to these other groups. It's like a system, right? Perfect way to understand that, the book, The Master's Carpet, read that, and he breaks down. I did a whole show, and I probably put that episode up in here where he breaks down the system and setting up this religious system, but it's spreading out misinformation to cause confusion, right, within the people, right? Measures were to be taken immediately. Some means of execution. The department and the municipalities of Paris are authorized to consult with the community of public instructions of the National Convention in order that these establishments shall be put in action by November 1st next, and consequently, colleges now in operation and the faculties of theology, medicine, arts, and law are suppressed throughout the Republic. This was the death sentence of the university. It was not to be restored after the revolution had subsided, no more than those of the Providence, right? So then we look at the French Revolution marked the turning point for the ascendancy of atheism, right? It to a permanent position as a cognitive and cultural stance against papal supremacy and the Roman court's empire across Europe throughout the world, right? What it said? It tells you itself. It says the French Revolution marked a turning point in the ascendancy of atheism, right? To a permanent position as a cognitive and cultural stance against papal supremacy and the Holy Roman Empire across Europe and throughout the world, right? The French Revolution, and we know this school, we've been studying how it practices the chicanery, right? And how it's been going against, the church, right? And basically this antichrist system, right? So we have these atheists, we have these antichrists. We see this system being set up, right? So in 1806 through 1968, reestablishment. The university was reestablished by Napoleon on the 1st of May, 1806. All the faculties were replaced by a single century, the University of France. The decree of 17 March 1808 created 5 distinct faculties: law, medicine, letters of humanity, science, and theology. Traditionally, letters of science had been grouped together into one faculty, that of arts. After the country, a century, people recognized that the new system was less favorable to study, right? The defeat of 1870 at the hands of Prussia, right, that's we can see right here, was a German state located on most of the northern European plain, also occupied southern and eastern regions. It formed the German Empire because that's the Third Reich. Remember, we're talking about empires, right? We had the Babylonian Empire, we got the British Empire, and now we see, the German Empire. When it united the German states in 1871, it was de facto dissolved by an emergence decree of transferring power of the Pisani government to the German Chancellor Franz von Papen in 1932. Right, so we can, leave that there, but just understand the kingdom of, Berlin decisively shaped the history of Germany, right? Was partially to blame for the growth of the superiority of the German university system of the 19th century, right? And led to another serious reform of the French university in the 1880s, right? The licensed bachelor's degree is divided into the faculties of letters of philosophy, history, modern language, with French, Latin, and Greek being requirements for all of them. And for the faculties of science into mathematics, physical science, and natural science. The building of Sorbonne was fully renovated, right? So let's look at, Freemasonry. Now we're going to look at the Grand Orient. Remember, now we was just talking about, this atheism in this system, right? So now we're in, this is from 1806 to 1968. So we're in the time of, this new formation of Freemasonry, that we know from 1717, right? The Grand Orient de France, God-F, I call it, G.O.D.F., right, is the oldest and largest of the several Freemasonic organizations based in France. It is the oldest in continental Europe, as it was formed out of the older Grand Lodge of France in 1773, and briefly absorbed the rump of the oldest body in 1799, allowing it to date its foundation to 1728 or 1733. The Grand Orient de France is generally regarded as what? The mother lodge of the continental Freemasonry. All right, so there go the symbol right there. You can look this up yourself, right? Relationship with other Masonic jurisdictions. The Grand Orient of France belongs to the continental tradition of Freemasonry, known to its practitioners as liberal Masonry. and the defining features of which are complete freedom of religious conscience and deliberate involvement in politics. This is antithetical, right? And the Anglo-American tradition of Freemasonry, which remains male only and requires a belief in a deity, but which otherwise bans discussion of both religion and politics. That's what it claims, right? This difference affects which other grand jurisdictions give GODF recognition and deems it regular. Those Grand Lodges and Grand Orients that follow the continental traditions tend to recognize the authority of the GODF, right? While those that follow the Anglo-American traditions do not. Female membership. When the Grand Orientant of France took shape in 1773, it inherited several lodges of adaptation attached to its own lodges. These were open to Masons and admitted their female relatives to their own set of rituals. They received an implied seal of approval when the Duc de Then the Grand Master of France became Grand Master of the new Lodge of Adaptation in Paris, with the Duchess of Bourbon as Grand Mistress. Briefly eclipsed by the Revolution, they again became fashionable under Napoleon, before being declared unconstitutional in 1808. They were revived in 1901 as a women's society before finally separating in 1935. The resulting organization is now the Grand Lodge Femelle de France. For many years, the Grand Orient would not allow its lodges to initiate women, but did recognize and receive women who were made Freemasons in other jurisdictions. This changed in 2010, and after some setback, the Grand Orient currently allows the initiation of women. Right? Napoleon. In France, Napoleon III established a dictatorship over official French Freemasonry. Now, remember, he was overlooking the colleges and set this dictatorship up, okay? So we can see him again appointing first Prince Lucien Marat and later Marshal Magnan to maintain close supervision over Freemasonry and suppress any hints of opposition to the regime. Paris Commune. According to the Marxist author Ernest Belfort Bax, Masonry had a considerable involvement in the Paris Commune after a couple of unsuccessful attempts at reconciling the Commune with the French government. Schism with the United Grand Lodge of England. Now we know schism is a break, right? In 1877, in an instigation at the instigation of the Protestant pastor, Protestant, keep in mind, right? It allowed those who had no belief in a supreme being to be admitted. Right? And this is from the Protestants. The United Grand Lodge of England, ugly, right, and related lodges regarded belief in a supreme being as a Masonic landmark. It was this decision that had the root cause of the schism between the Grand Orient and those lodges that followed it, and the rest of Freemasonry, right? It is a schism in Freemasonry which continues to this day. It is argued that the definition is ambiguous. The Anderson landmarks are, my fault, gotta look over here, his own collection of interpretation of historical landmarks, and that changes both interpretations and practice have occurred before and since. The decision was not usually approved in France the decision was not universally approved in France. By 1849, see how we say that, France, is like a percentage. It just so happens that France is the highest rate of atheism, right? Approved in France. By 1894, many lodges had split off in protest and formed the Grand Lodge de France, GLDF. And in 1910, a few members of the Grand Oriental, wishing to reintroduce the concept of God, the Grand Architect brought back and the recertified Scottish rite. Remember we said the Scottish, the German, the Scottish thing from Switzerland. And this, in the result, fraction with the national body. They amalgamate with the English Lodge of Paradox to produce in 1913 a third Grand Lodge, La Grande Lodge Nationale Indépendante, right, France. Now the Grand Lodge National Français, the Third Republic, or the Third Reich, right? The Grand Orient was instrumental in the founding of the left-wing Republican Party. The Grand Orient was implicated in the Affaires de France, where it was accused of collecting and holding information on religious and political affiliations of army officers passed on by members of the government, having been collected with the intention of blocking practicing Catholics and non-Republicans from further advancements. You see how this system works? You see how it works, and the blackballing and how it works, right? There are several reasons for the schism in Freemasonry and why it persists. The first instance of derecognition occurred in the United States shortly after the American Civil War in 1869. The Grand Orient de France, GOD-F, recognized a Masonic group in Louisiana, which was not recognized by the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, right? This was seen by, G.O.D as an invasion on its jurisdiction, and it withdrew its recognition of GOD-F, right? At the request of G.O.D, several other American lodges also withdrew recognition. There is evidence that racial motivation may have played a part in this derecognition. The GOD-F had recently passed a resolution stating that neither color, race, nor religion should disqualify a man from initiation, and the Grand Lodge of Louisiana strictly excluded blacks and those of mixed race. The initial schism was not anonymous in the United States. Many American Grand Lodges continue to recognize the GOD-F well into the 20th century. 1877 schism. The schism widened in 1877 when the GOD-F changed its constitution to allow for complete religious I don't know how to pronounce that word. While the Anglo-American traditions had long required candidates to acknowledge a belief in a deity, the goddess removed that requirement, starting with the litigant imposed that all men are given without distinction of class, origin, or denomination the means of to be themselves and have freedom of choice, to be responsible of their own maturity and master their destiny. In some, the goddess would admit atheists, while the lodges of the Anglo-American traditions would not. The United Grand Lodge of England then withdrew its recognition and declared the goddess to be irregular, as other jurisdictions tended to follow the lead of their goddess in ugly schisms, and the schism widened. Right? Background on the belief of deities. There is some debate about the Anglo-American Freemasonry began requiring a belief in deity. It may have dated from the early days of Freemasonry. The Regius manuscript, the oldest known Masonic document, dating from 1425-50, states that Masons must love well God and Holy Church also. James Anderson, 1723, Constitution states that a Mason is obliged to the tenants to obey the moral laws, and if he rightly understands the art, he will never be a stupid atheist or non-religious libertine. Right? The goddess required belief in God from 1849 until 1877, and then revised its positions. The difference was not only limited to the requirements and belief following the 1877 changes. The Grand Oriental also removed all references to the Grand Architect of the universe from its rites and removed the volume of sacred law, which in French was the Bible, from its rituals. These elements had been present in France Freemasonry before 1849. Right? So this is where we'll end this off right here. Right? Hopefully you have an understanding what Freemasonry is. Freemasonry is philosophy, psychology, right? The use of persuasion, convincing you that one system is not good. You can hear it today, if you go into any of these atheist, theist groups and all of that. You can hear this stuff. You can listen to the conversations and, the post and all of that. And after understanding what I just presented to you, you should be able to understand rhetoric, right? And if you don't worry, we will be getting all into that in about 3 shows, right? After that, everything else will be, the art. Rhetoric is the art, how this works. So you can go on yourself and start learning this now so you be ahead of the game or not. Either way, you know what I'm saying? I'm Juice Warner. This is the Valley of Dry Bones, where we gonna wake the dead even if they don't want it.